Our next speaker is Rufus Stephens. He's well known to most of us in this room. He's a certified wildlife biologist. He's most recently retired from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, where he held the position as the wildlife district leader for the Edwards Plateau Wildlife District. Rufus is now retired, and he spends his time helping us with events like this, as well as working as a wildlife and natural resource consultant, assisting landowners and communities with development of wildlife management plans with an emphasis on the management of birds. So with that introduction, Rufus Stephens.
Thanks, Greg. So, you show me a remote, or?
Yeah. This is the pointer. You want to progress, push the bottom.
Okay.
You want to go back, push the bottom.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for the pass that.
Yeah, you can go ahead and hand those out. Yes, new book, and so I do have some in the back. That's my plug for the day. Is our book that we just had published back in February by A&M Press. It is available from A&M Press, and if you go to A&M Press to their website and you put in code 25A, you get a 25% discount on it, which just about makes it the same cost as Amazon. But you supported a Texas publisher. So enough of this controversial stuff. Let's talk about something that everybody can agree on. So over my years as a wildlife biologist, urban wildlife biologist, suburban wildlife biologist, rural wildlife biologist, deer have been a continuing issue through all those years. And in trying to work with them in communities on how to manage them is definitely a challenge. And so one of the things that biologists, lots of wildlife biologists get into wildlife management, they said, oh yes, I want to hunt and fish, and that's why I want to be a wildlife biologist. It's like, no, be a doctor, be a lawyer if you want to hunt and fish, because you won't get a chance to do that. And it's also kind of like, yeah, and I really don't like working with people. And it's like, most of what wildlife management is really about is working with people, and especially from managing things like suburban deer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, and I know a lot of y'all have been through this before. I'm going to go through it pretty quick, but it's the background that we've got to go through to say, how do we talk about, in communities about dealing with deer? And as Craig did such a great job in sort of laying out in his earlier presentation about science, we got to know a little bit about the science. And I'm going to go a little bit past that, but we're going to stop with some of the basics, and we're going to discuss a little bit. So I'm going to get y'all to interact with me, because y'all are the community. Does anybody here not have a problem with deer? Okay, anybody, a couple people laughing? Carrying capacity. So carrying capacity, basically, this is the ability of the land to support a population of wildlife. Basically, as reproduction will decrease as the population approaches carrying capacity. Okay, and as it exceeds carrying capacity, mortality increases. But there's what we might call cultural carrying capacity, and this is often, when we're talking about deer, is above what so that our tolerance. People's tolerance for deer in their neighborhoods is beyond what the natural carrying capacity for those communities, what they are. And I'll get to, well, what is that number? So white-tailed deer, basically their food is protein, high-protein diet, greater than 12% protein. Basically, we're talking about forbs and browse or woody plants. Forbs, broadleaf flowering plants. Browse or woody plants, trees, shrubs, vines. They have certain water requirement, basically within a mile or less, which usually is not much of a problem in most areas. Cover, there's basically two types of cover. There's protection and security type cover, and then there's fawning cover, which is often kind of grassy habitat, but sometimes are people's shrubs in their front yard. Their diet, what does it look like? Most of it is browse. That's the vast majority of it. Another big chunk is forbs. Those are the two that I just talked about. That's more than 50%. And then you basically go mast, which is a forester's term for acorns and nuts. Nuts aren't acorns and acorns aren't nuts. And you combine them together and you get mast. And then there's soft mast, like prickly pear. And so, but we're not going to go into that too deep. But that's between those three basic food types, that's more than 75% of their diet. You'll see that grasses make up less than 12% of their diet. You see them out in your yard, looks like they're eating grass. They're really looking for anything but the grass that's out there because it doesn't have enough protein. And agricultural crops, and then feed. And this is basically for the cross timbers, which is a little bit north of us. But this is pretty much what it is across their range. Reproduction, twins are normal. If you're having less than twins, that's sign that you're approaching or have exceeded carrying capacity. Okay, so twins are normal. We need to keep that in mind. That's normal. There's actually, it's only yearling or does in their first time that they are bred that they will have a single. And actually triplets in sort of adult deer is almost, in a healthy animal, is almost as common as singles are. So twins are normal. Hill country population of deer over a long period of time. Actually, right about 2003, we changed, and I was going to do that as a disclaimer. I'm retired, but so freshly retired, I can't help but say we. Parks and Wildlife. And so I'm going to try to watch that, but I can't help but fall into that old pattern. But so Parks and Wildlife in about 2003 changed the way they did deer surveys. And so the surveys prior to that and then after that, they do not, it's a different technique, and so they will not, you can't draw graphs across them. All during this period, they were basically done the same way. So you can see, other than some fluctuations, the deer population is pretty stable, actually slightly increased, but this is after a really huge increase in the late 50s and early 60s. And so this is a very high deer population. Couple things to look at. The red bars are bucks, but there is not, twins are normal. The ratio of bucks to does in fawns is virtually equal. So why would you have so many more does than you do bucks? And the answer is it's a hunted population, and it's clearly a hunted population. And the focus is on shooting antlers. And so that's why this population looks this way. The other thing is twins are normal, so the top part of the bars are the fawns for each year. Do you see any year where there are twice as many, or even, we would say, really, while twins are normal, really to kind of make it to the end of the summer, we should be somewhere between 1 and 1.5, right? And so we lose some to bobcats and other critters and stuff like that. But you're not even close to 1 to 1. So the does outnumber the number of fawns. So your fawn crop is not very high. So this is clearly beyond carrying capacity. Here's just some of the data, just the numbers from, kind of after after Parks and Wildlife switched the survey techniques. And basically you just see the same kind of trend, that it kind of goes up and down, fluctuates, from one year to the next, but the overall trend is kind of either flat or slightly increasing. But what about a suburban or urban area? This is an example, and there are many communities that you can look at, and you can see that this is very much a common theme, is that you're seeing a very dramatic increase in the number of deer in urban settings, or suburban settings. And so you can see that actually between 2004 and 2012, there was almost a double or over a doubling of the population in this area. And it is kind of, you might ask the question, well, how big is the area? Because all you're doing is talking about the number of deer. But from a relative standpoint, the population still has doubled. And the other aspects of it are clearly the same, in the sense of there are not very many bucks. There's mostly does, and there's not very many fawns. Actually, there are fewer fawns. So if I back up, does it back up? No? Can I back up here? Nope.
Middle button will back up.
Huh?
Middle button back up.
Oh, middle button will back up. Okay, thank you. But just looking at that kind of similar time frame, again, it was fairly flat over a larger area. Parks and Wildlife went to what's called deer management units. The deer management unit 7 is basically the Balcones Escarpment. So if you think of where we are right now, up through Austin, over to Boerne, kind of back toward Blanco, and over to close to Fredericksburg, and then back south toward Bandera. That's that area. That also happens to be where this data was also collected from, but where most of our suburban urban deer are. So, what are some of the deer-human issues that we have? Landscape damage. Anybody have landscape damage? Anybody have plants that are being caged to avoid the deer? Deer vehicle accidents. How many people here have hit a deer? Raise your hand.
I didn't hit a deer. The deer hit me.
That's what my wife. She was here earlier dropping off some of those handouts, and she has what she calls DCT. When she moved here from Dallas in the mid-90s, she has deer collision trauma. There's DCT. She has DCT, and actually she was driving a Geo at that time. They had hit the sides, the front. I mean, that car, every single. I mean, and she would go, there's a deer, and it would run into the door, and she was like, slow down, and then they would run into her. So yeah, she had that where deer ran into her. So deer vehicle accidents, human safety, attacks by deer, as well as diseases. These are kind of the basic issues that when a community comes to a biologist or a Parks and Wildlife staff person, this is usually their sort of concerns. This is what they are concerned about. So what does browse look like? Basically, this is shin oak on the left that is being eaten to the ground. It should look kind of like a plum thicket. This is a cedar round that is about 1.5 feet tall and about as big around as your thumb. It ought to probably be about 6 feet tall. What we tend to get in kind of urban settings, while most of this that's really in this picture is not really a browse line because it's mostly mountain laurel, and mountain laurel is poisonous, right? And so, but if you kind of look in the background, there's kind of everything is sort of trimmed up, and you see no bedding plants around. That's kind of typical of a high urban deer population. You might just notice the condition of that deer right there. You can see the ribs, you can see the hip bones. That's not very good. Deer vehicle accidents. This one's actually on I-10. It stopped this vehicle. But most of them are more... one of the things you'll look at too, if you look at sort of nationwide data on deer vehicle accidents, you'll see that that actually Texas doesn't rank as one of the highest in deer vehicle accidents. And I think that a big reason of that is we do have smaller deer, which our colleagues in the Midwest will always point out to us that you got dinky deer down in Texas. But the reality is that a lot of those deer vehicle accidents don't get reported, right? And the reason, and most of that data that you'll see is done by the insurance industry. So if you don't make a claim, then it isn't going to be reported as a deer vehicle accident. And I can tell you there were several of the deer running into our car that we did not claim. It didn't mean that it didn't do damage and that it didn't hit us, but we didn't make an insurance claim on it, and because it wasn't going to, the amount of deductible and everything like that just wasn't worth it. So there's a lot of deer vehicle accidents that aren't necessarily this bad. So, so people and deer. I looked up, just looking to see what was kind of recent. There was actually a more recent, September 22nd, there was actually a guy in Tennessee that was attacked in his backyard by a buck, and a guy had to reach in and pull him out of the backyard. This is from South Carolina, where actually it was at a rehab facility. And one of the rehabbers was charged and stabbed in the leg by a buck. Those are deer are wild animals, and even though this is one that was in a rehabilitation facility, obviously being handled with people a lot, deer have instincts about what they consider a threat, and that potentially can be us. And so these are seen pretty regularly across the country. They aren't real common in urban settings, but they happen pretty regularly. Diseases, Lyme's disease. And Lyme's disease is really a northeastern Great Lakes type issue. But you can see clusters in Texas. They're basically where populations are. You can see where we are. And actually, as I understand, where the folks that are listening to us online in North Texas, that there are cases in that area as well. Is it just a matter of time before that builds? So while Lyme's disease, we do not have it like the Northeast does. We certainly have cases, and when you have people and deer in close proximity, you have more opportunity for that kind of disease transmission. So biologists will go, when we deal with these kinds of things, that people will say, half people hate them, half people love them. Okay? And that's really probably an oversimplification of the problem. That just, to me, doesn't look, I just see a problem happening there. But really, it's probably more like a bell curve to get into science, right? There are people that are really passionate about the deer, and under no circumstance do they want to see anything done to manage the population in a urban setting, suburban setting. And the people that really hate them, they're also a minority. The vast majority of the people are in between them, right? And they are the ones that also, I mean, when you're talking about providing information and helping to educate them, these are people that don't really understand the issues around deer, some of that basic biology that I just went over. And they need to know that in order to make an informed decision about what their community does about their deer. Which brings up, does Parks and Wildlife manage those deer? Texas Parks and Wildlife manage the resource on behalf of the citizens of the state of Texas. But in communities, we always say it's a community decision to do anything about it, overpopulation of white-tailed deer in their communities. So it's not Parks and Wildlife going to come and say, you need to get rid of deer or you need to do this. We just say, Parks and Wildlife just says, here are your tools. Here are the tools that we will make available to you to be able to manage your deer population. And it's your decision to whether you do anything at all. Okay, so that's a little bit of the framework for the regulatory authority over deer in Texas and how it relates to communities. So, what do we do to solve this problem? What are some ideas? How would you try to approach managing a deer population in a suburban area?
2 does before a buck.
2 does before a buck. So he's talking about harvest or removal, that you need to remove 2 does before you remove a buck. And that certainly relates to the population graph that I had, where the vast majority of the population is does, right? So if you're going to address managing the population, you need to think about the doe side of the population. But if you have a community where you can't, I mean, and so, but removal could take a number of different avenues. I assume you maybe meant hunting, and he's nodding his head, is that not all communities can you do that, can you hunt in, but we'll get to that because that's not always out of, off the table as far as part of how they're managed in a particular area. In the back?
They're managed